Committee, which has been created specifically to look at call-in requests relating to Cabinet decisions. I would like to welcome all the members of the subcommittee who are sitting here this throughout the evening. In addition, I would like to welcome members of the public who are watching this meeting either at home, well, they seem to be at home rather than here in Hounslow House. I'm just going to explain a little bit how the meeting will work this evening. As chair, I will be running the meeting and I will be inviting people to speak. I will allow every member of the subcommittee who wishes to speak the opportunity to do so. So I would actually, though, like to ask all members to wait their turn and not interrupt people when they are talking or comment on the contributions of others, except during their own statement. I wish to stress that I wish this to be a courteous, polite meeting, even where we do not agree on things. As part of this, may I remind all members that in accordance with the Constitution, when I speak during debate, any member speaking at the time must stop speaking, and so must all others. Further, if any member persistently disregards my ruling as chair by behaving improperly, offensively, or by disrupting business, I may move for them to be not heard any further. Does everybody understand my wish for courtesy tonight?
Yes, Chair.
We also have a few other members who I'll be inviting to address the subcommittee tonight. These are Councillor Sam Hearn, who will be speaking to clarify the reasons for the call-in request on behalf of Councillor Gerald McGregor, who is unable to attend this evening. Councillor Hanif Khan is the relevant Cabinet member for the Cabinet decision, who will explain why he thinks the Cabinet decision was reasonable, and he will respond to the call-in report. Councillor Kuldeep Tug, who under the Constitution is a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who is also a signatory to the call-in request, may ask questions but may not vote at the meeting. I will be inviting him to ask questions at the appropriate time. In addition, because there is no formal Conservative member of the subcommittee present tonight due to COVID-19 isolation requirements, I am using my discretion as chair to allow Councillor Tug as a guest member to contribute to the debates as well. I reiterate, he will not be able to vote. So, councillors, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this meeting tonight of the subcommittee. Right. This meeting has been called under the constitutional arrangements for call-in, which require a meeting of the subcommittee to take place within 7 days of the council receiving the notification of a valid call-in request. On this occasion, in order to meet those requirements, it has not been possible for the agenda to be published in accordance with the usual access to information requirements. So I now confirm that, as chair, I have accepted the agenda papers as urgent. This means that we can proceed. This has also been addressed in the committee report itself. We also have a supplementary agenda which contains a statement from Councillor Joanna Biddulph, which clarifies her views on the call-in and which I have agreed should be included for members' consideration as she is unable to be in attendance at the meeting this evening. I will remind members of her documents again when we come to considering our position on the call-in, and of course, members may refer to it at any time during the meeting if they wish to do so. I'd just like to talk about the call-in. It is a member-led process. 8 or more members express concerns about a Cabinet decision, and so a group of 5 members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who are not party to the call-in request, will review it and come to a view on the call-in request and the appropriate response back to Cabinet. The terms of reference for this new subcommittee allow us to do the following: consider call-in requests relating to Cabinet decisions, refer any recommendations for changes that we might decide back to the Cabinet. We can also refer the matter to Council if we consider the decision falls outside the Council's policy framework or budget. I would also like to remind members that the review of a call-in request should not in itself be adversarial in nature. This subcommittee is not the owner of the call-in request and so are not advocating on behalf or against it. We are here to review it and the Cabinet report. We are here tonight to express our opinions on the merits or otherwise of the call-in and try to come to a collective view. Failing that, it will be a majority view. I would also like to ask members to bear in mind throughout the meeting the need for overview and scrutiny members to act as a critical friend to the Cabinet. We are here to try to make it, and therefore the Council overall, make better decisions, and we must do that in the spirit of friendship. The procedure that we will be following tonight has already been circulated to members of the subcommittee. It is based on the terms of reference for this subcommittee, the constitutional requirements for how committees operate, and the members' scrutiny handbook. I will now explain to everyone, as this is going to be, as it is our first meeting. The process tonight is a two-stage one. First off, we will consider the decision and the reasons for the call-in request to see if we agree with all of it, part of it, or none of it. Secondly, and depending on the outcome of the first stage, we will then move on to discuss what recommendations for changes, if any, we wish to refer back to the Cabinet to consider. We're going to do this in the following way. We shall start the first stage by asking Councillor Hearn to speak for up to 5 minutes to introduce the call-in request and his reasons for doing so. This would have been done tonight by Councillor McGregor as the organiser of the call-in, but he is unable to attend this evening. I have used my discretion to allow Councillor Hearn to substitute for him at his request. I will then ask Councillor Khan, as the relevant Cabinet member, also to speak for up to 5 minutes to explain why he thinks the original decision was reasonable and why the call-in should not be upheld in part or in full. I will then ask members of the subcommittee to ask questions of clarification to the two councillors. I will also be inviting Councillor Tuck, as he has a constitutional right to ask questions, to do the same at this stage. I will then ask each of the members of the subcommittee in turn to speak for up to 5 minutes on the first question, which is to see if we agree with all, part of it, or none of the call-in request. And I'm going to be doing it in the following order. First, I will be asking Councillor Foote, then Councillor Tuck, Councillor Akhundzada, Councillor Lal, and then myself. I will then invite Councillor Foote as the Vice Chair briefly to sum up to see if we have any partial or total consensus. I will then ask him to propose a motion based on this, confirming if the subcommittee wishes to agree with the call-in request, part of the call-in request, and if so, which elements or none of the request. I will seek a seconder for the motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. If the decision is not to agree with any part of the call-in request, we will move on to the next agenda item, as we will not be making any reference to the Cabinet. That will conclude the first stage. If we have decided that we agree with or part of the call-in request, we will move to the second part of the process, which is to decide what we wish to recommend to the Cabinet. I intend to do this in a similar way, which is to ask each member of the subcommittee in turn to speak for up to 5 minutes with their views on what should be in those recommendations. I will do this in the same order as last time. And again, I will invite Councillor Foote as the Vice Chair briefly to sum up to see if we have any partial or whole consensus. I will then ask him to propose a motion based on this, confirming what the subcommittee wishes to refer to the Cabinet to consider. I will be seeking a seconder for that motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. That is the process for dealing with call-in requests. Okay, that was quite long, I'm sorry. We therefore now begin the meeting with apologies for absence and declarations of interest. As I've already stated, Councillor Joanna Bidoff cannot be with us tonight as she is having to self-isolate on COVID grounds, along with several other members of the Conservative group, including Councillor Ron Mishisho, who might otherwise have been able to substitute for her. We, of course, send them our best wishes. So, are there any apologies? Okay. I would just also like to confirm that we are quorum tonight. We are a committee of 4. And lastly, but not least, I would like to see if are there any declarations of interest or other communications? Yes.
If you can just flag up the fact that I think most members on this committee have received numerous emails from residents, I suppose, from the Chiswick area regarding this report.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's true. Noted. Right. We are now going to move on to Agenda 2. Finally, I'm sure some of you are saying. This is obviously the main item on the agenda, the call-in request relating to the recent Cabinet decision on the report entitled Cycleway 9, Chiswick High Road, Goldhawk Road to Heathfield Terrace. I know that all members of the subcommittee have received and read a large number of emails from residents expressing their views on the Cycleway 9 issue. And actually, these have been really helpful in terms of understanding the wider context of the issue, which is one Overview and Scrutiny Committee has already looked at extensively. As such, members are well versed on the range of views held by the residents. However, today, to help avoid any misunderstanding about the role of this subcommittee, it is important to note that we do not have the power to stop this or any other Cabinet decision, nor does the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. What we can do is review decisions of the Cabinet and make recommendations about them, which the Cabinet are obliged to consider, even if they choose not to agree. It is that process of review that we will be doing tonight by considering a call-in request on the Cabinet decision on the Cycleway. I will therefore begin by reminding all members of the constitutional reasons on which a call-in request must be made. Inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to the decision, the absence of adequate evidence on which to base a decision, the decision is contrary to the policy framework or contrary to or not wholly in accordance with the budget framework, the action is not proportionate to the desired outcome, a potential human rights challenge, insufficient consideration of legal and financial advice. I would like to ask all members to bear these in mind in the following discussion. As any part of call-in does not meet this criteria, you cannot then support that element of it. I will start, as I stated, by inviting Councillor Hearn to introduce the call-in request and clarify the reasons for submitting. Councillor Hearn, the document is included in the agenda pack, so hopefully everybody has read it. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Hearn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to address the subcommittee. I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow signatories of the call-in request. The committee are asked to come to one of the following 3 conclusions: that the challenge to the decision taken by Cabinet should be taken no further, that the matter should be referred back to the Cabinet, that the decision should be referred to the full Council if the subcommittee believes that it be contrary to the policy framework or budget framework. Ideally, we as the signatories of the call-in would prefer the third option, that is that the matter should be referred to a meeting of the Borough Council where all the councillors representing Chiswick and neighbouring wards can have their say and represent the views of their constituents. This is a matter which, as you know, affects all residents of all 3 Chiswick wards and has implications for Brentford. There is ample evidence that the Cabinet's decision is contrary to Council's policy framework and the budget framework. If this isn't to be referred back to the Borough Council, we would reluctantly be prepared to support option 2 and have their decision referred back to Cabinet. But that would have to come with a very clear direction on the concerns that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee have. For your benefit, I'll now set out some of the more salient concerns that I think the committee should have. There is the failure by the council to carry out, as legally required, a full interim review of the operation of the experimental traffic order that's in existence at the moment. As part of that interim review, the council is legally required to formally consider the option of removing the cycleway, and we see no evidence that this has been done. And I don't think that's been presented to this committee, or rather to the full committee. If we move from that to the matter of inadequate consultation, and I know that this is a thorny issue, but there has been a failure to carry out a full public consultation on either the scheme implemented under the existing experimental traffic order or the proposed new experimental traffic order. Such a consultation would include the consideration of the option of removing the existing cycleway scheme and not implementing the proposed new experimental traffic order. The lead member, I know, has suggested that because the original very expensive cycleway scheme was consulted on and that was approved, that no further consultation is required. That simply does not stand up to any real scrutiny. The original scheme was very expensive and was substantially different. I know that has not been an opinion expressed by some, but it is a very different scheme that's now in place from the original one. There is also failure to carry out a proper consultation of those running businesses on Chiswick High Road, and this is a running sore. TfL's failure to undertake any consultation of local businesses when they were devising the original scheme has led to many of the problems that we've been faced with, and the need to make substantial changes. But let's leave that to one side. You would have heard very little, I think one paragraph on the impact on businesses and what businesses feel about this scheme. That's something that needs to be done. Not proportionate. The work that you've had presented to you, which did come to the committee late, there's a failure to demonstrate any modal shift has occurred and that traffic has reduced as a result. There is no evidence that road users are undertaking journeys on foot or by bike that have previously been made by bike, by car or bus. No attempt has been made to acquire this data. There is no demonstrable improvement in air quality that would perhaps indicate that people are switching from motor vehicles to foot or to bike. So, all taking much more, could I have a slight extension? I'm sorry, this all takes a lot longer. The modifications in the new proposed experimental traffic order do not adjust modal shift. Without modal shift, you're not achieving the main thing you're trying to do with this cycle scheme, and you can read the TfL website. The failure to install air monitoring stations along the length of the road means that there's little evidence the cycleway has produced any improvement in air quality, and that's hardly surprising when you view the original TfL reports where they said this wasn't going to happen anyway. There are technical reports which have been sent to the council, one very detailed report subject of legal concerns, but none of these issues have actually been brought to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like, if I had more time, to talk about the bus stops, the floating islands. There are various serious issues with those. They are not regarded as ideal by any professionals working in this area. There is a lot of disagreement about data about cycle journeys that are undertaken, other statistics that have been put out there, and they've been challenged very robustly, that the number of cycle journeys, the accidents and so on. What I asked for last time at the committee was that an independent report be done so that the Cabinet could consider that. And I still think that work needs to be done. For a decision to be made, we need to know this information. And if it's going to take longer time, then we need to take longer time. I would have to say that if these matters continue to be ignored, that the council will face, in all probability, that they're going to be called to account by the Secretary of State for their active non-compliance with council policy, its own policy framework, and their statutory government responsibilities. That's not a threat, it's just to explain why a really thorough consideration needs to be given. Thank you for giving me the extended time, Chair. I request that the decision of the new ETO be referred to Borough Council at the earliest opportunity so that democracy can be seen to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hearn. I will now ask Councillor Khan to explain why he thinks the Cabinet decision was reasonable and respond to the call-in report. Councillor Khan, you too will have exactly the same time as Councillor Hearn, which was 5 minutes, but I am happy to let you have longer if need be.
Chair, thank you very much. And I do wish my fellow comrades are well who can't join us today. So I wasn't aware of that. So I do hope they're doing well. I will probably take 5 minutes, but we do have a lot more information to discuss. I assume a lot of that will come through the relevant questions that members will ask. But I do want to just give a little bit of background and just explain that the council's transport strategy is being set out by the council's commitment to reducing the dominance of cars on the road, and we see that everywhere. And this means that where possible, we want to take the necessary steps to provide amenities that support walking and cycling. And the COVID-19 pandemic and its kind of associated effects kind of further highlighted that the need for the benefits of urgently providing high quality cycle infrastructure. So Cycleway 9 is a proposed high quality cycle route that runs between Olympia and Brentford. And the section which we probably are most aware of is the tiny bit of the section that runs through Chiswick High Road. So the whole length of it is about 6 kilometres. And the route corridor that the Cycleway 9 follows has actually poor cycle casualty record, and this is based on forecasts that are increasing as cycle increases. And without an introduction for a well put together, produced, safe Cycleway 9, collisions with cyclists are probably likely to increase. In late 2020, this temporary version of Cycleway 9 was introduced in Chiswick as part of the pandemic response at the time. And as we as a responsible local authority, we were committed to supporting a modal shift of active travel and reducing congestion across the borough and minimising the kind of pressure on existing public transport links. And I'll just add here that I myself, someone who has done a modal shift, I am definitely one. I can actually put my hand up and say that I have taken up cycling as an individual, and I used to cycle as a young lad, but since lockdown and since 2020 or even before, I took up cycling. And also what I like to say is that as a local authority, we are always committed to supporting this modal shift, which I just mentioned about my own kind of personal experience as well, and with active travel, and definitely reducing the kind of congestion that we see. And it really needs to minimize the pressure that we're seeing on our roads, and also reducing the pressure that we see also on our public transport links as well. And this all kind of falls in very nicely with the London Mayor's kind of ambitions, and it dates back to Ken Livingstone as well. If you remember, colleagues, that where Ken Livingstone wanted to improve active travel across the city, and then, as you know, that after that we had Boris Johnson, who is currently the obviously the Prime Minister, but he was the chair of TfL and obviously was the mayor as well. And then he introduced Boris Bikes, if you remember. So consistent mayors have grabbed this gauntlet and run with it, really, to try and improve the network for improving cyclists across London as well. And our policy also aligns with the central government policy as well. And it has been evidented by a letter that we all recently received to all council leaders by the Minister of State for Transport. And this was by Chris Heaton MP. And he highlighted the need for success of the active travel scheme, which they are totally behind as well. If you allow me, Chair, I'd like to read a passage from that letter that the Minister of State for Transport, Chris Heaton, Chris Harris MP, wrote to us. And again, this is very clear evidence as to the point I was making, and I believe I'm part of that as well. Many of my other colleagues are. And he says that over the last year, cycling has risen by 46%. In 2020, we saw the highest level of cycling on the public highways since the 1960s, and the greatest year-on-year increase in post-war history. Many people have started cycling for shorter journeys, saving appreciable amounts of pollution, noise, CO2, and traffic and danger. And in some cities, the delivery bike has become a normal sight as the delivery van. Even after these remarkable rises, according to one leading retailer, a further 37% of the population now wants to buy a bike. Now, I noticed that the alarm has gone off, so I'll only give a handful of milestones after that before I stop speaking, if you allow me, Chair. I'll probably take me about another minute. Thank you very much. So, obviously, the Cabinet agreed, as Councillor Hearn also said, in 2019 to carry out a consultation in 2019, which was a statutory one, and it was approved, and the permanent design scheme between Chiswick and High Road and the junction with Goldhawk Road and the county courts on Brentford High Street was agreed. But then with the COVID pandemic, it led to that work being paused on the Cycleway 9. And instead, as required by the Secretary of State in May 2020, statutory regulations meant that the Council and Transport for London implemented temporary measures to encourage and accommodate the active travel. I've got a few more, but I'm conscious of time as well, and I'll leave it there. And I'd just like to finish off by saying that to my right, I have Officer Jefferson with me, who you all know well, and also to my left I have Catherine Dunn as well, who is obviously on Cabinet as well, who you all know very well, who are supporting me here today. And if you've got any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm hoping I didn't take too much of your time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. We are now going to move to questions. These are questions to Councillors Hearn and to Councillor Khan. These will be from Councillor Tuck, who has a constitutional right to ask questions, and from members of the subcommittee too. I would just like to remind you all that your questions should relate specifically to the call-in report, which is the matter we are considering this evening. So please explain which part of the call-in you are asking your question about. Also remember, these are questions of clarification on what Councillors Hearn and Khan have said. Thank you. I think I'll start with Councillor Foot and then with Councillor Tuck.
I would like some clarification from Councillor Khan, really about the consultation that's taking place on whether or not this is going to be throughout the propositions, or is it going to be at the end?
Through Chair, Councillor Foot, are you referring to the new experimental traffic order? Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I mean, I can just start that, and I'll ask, if you allow me, Officer Jefferson to answer. But in terms of the consultation, usually when we implement a new experimental traffic order, we don't need to have an engagement process. And actually the consultation is the experimental traffic order, which generally lasts about 6 months to 18 months. And between that time is where the consultation goes. And this is why they're called experimental traffic orders. So we're learning during that process all the time, and we're engaging with the community during that period. I'll just hold it there if there's anything technical that Jefferson would like to add.
Thank you, Councillor Khan, and thank you, Councillor Foote. Yes, it is under Section 9 of the Road Traffic Regulation Act of 1984. The Highway Authority is empowered to impose, that's the strong word they use I'm just stating exactly what's written in the statement, an experimental traffic order. We don't require any pre-engagement beforehand. The consultation starts once the scheme is implemented. Actually, what we're proposing this time around with this new order is to actually undertake a 21-day consultation period, a pre-engagement period. And the idea behind that is to see if there are other things that we haven't considered that we can then put in place as part of the implementation. Beyond that, post-implementation, there will still be a statutory 6-month consultation period. And from my point of view, an experiment, which is maximum of 18 months, the entirety of it is a learning process. So as we go along throughout the process, as we get new knowledge, get more data, we can make amendments, reasonable amendments where necessary.
Can I just ask if something came up during this period, the experimental period, oblique consultation, that you see as being something that could be implemented urgently or easily, would that be done, or would it need to wait until the end of the practice?
We can make amendments, reasonable amendments, whilst the trial is ongoing. Yes, we can.
Yeah, Councillor Hearn, I didn't hear anything from you or in any other notes there about the current situation with climate control and what is happening in this country and other countries throughout the world, especially in the last few months. So I really didn't hear anything on that. So I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Thank you for providing me with the opening. We fully support what's being done to encourage people to cycle and to get out of their cars. What we're talking about is the specifics of this scheme, and that's why I focused in the time available on modal shift. And what we've got is this scheme is not producing modal shift. What you have heard from TfL is that they expect some time that modal shift will occur. You know, if we build it, they will come. But the fact is, a lot of people are working from home now, and they're not going to be commuting. And when they've got back their confidence in public transport, which we assume will happen, they may well be coming off their bikes. And when the weather turns again, so we have no guarantee that what we see, which is no modal shift, will actually turn into modal shift. What we have seen is a relatively large increase in cycling, if you can believe TfL statistics. But in absolute terms, it's not a large increase. We welcome that. I mean, we would like to see more people cycling. But to bring this scheme, which has a lot of disadvantages on the back of that, and the air monitoring, if nothing else, should convince you, as with the original scheme, that because there isn't going to be significant modal shift, some areas will benefit, Some areas on the very long street will benefit, but because the traffic is moving around from one street to another, where drivers trying to go about their lawful business, trying to make deliveries, will divert or be stuck in heavy traffic, that the pollution will be worse, air pollution will be worse in some areas and will be reduced in others. And we know that, and that's what the TfL air pollution consultants report said. But we're not even, the thing that does seem really odd to us is we have only one air monitoring station on that entire road. So we can't even demonstrate what the consultants said, is that some areas the air pollution will be worse and some of it will be better. And the element for climate change is obviously CO2. But we don't know. So we're being asked to move forward with some modifications to the scheme. And none of those modifications actually address the modal shift. What they address is moving the buses in particular, but also the other motor vehicles, more quickly through the system. So you've got a non-proven case and you're being asked to come up with a new modified scheme and you haven't looked at the fundamentals. So thank you for asking the question. I mean, we're not climate change deniers. This is our area. We live in it. We want to be able to cycle through it ourselves. We want our friends and neighbours to be able to cycle through it. But there are other options, and we're talking essentially. Sorry, I'm rabbiting on a bit too long, but we are talking about the fact that this cycleway scheme is not being particularly successful, and it's a bi-directional scheme, and TfL likes putting those schemes in, but it's not appropriate in this area. And the technical reports that you haven't seen would demonstrate that very clearly to you.
When you say it's not successful, Councillor Hearn, are you talking about the earlier scheme or the scheme that's being currently put forward?
The scheme that we've currently got in, that the proposal is put in to modify it, is not successful with modal shift. To the extent that TfL is saying it will get better, but they're using pre-COVID assumptions to say that the scheme that there will be a greater take-up. I mean, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but you're kind of betting on a horse that's not come in the first three.
Councillor Tuck.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 6 questions, if I may ask. My first question to Councillor Khan is, previously we were told that the council will consult while the temporary measures are in place. Then why a full public consultation was not done? Does the lead member agree that the failure to investigate and report back on the options of removing the experimental traffic order is contrary to the council's policy framework, and council has not fulfilled its statutory duty to complete an interim review of the original temporary scheme before implementing the new ETO?
Chair, yeah, I disagree with that comment. I think we have followed due process, and we are all abiding to what the statutory guidelines are. We have to conform to them, and we have followed due process all the way through. And we haven't diverted myself, or my officers from that process. So I don't believe there's anything that we've done which is out of line. Chair, if you allow me, I just would like to clarify, this is not a modification. This is a new ETA. We're not updating the old one. So I think it needs to be clear that this is a new experimental traffic order that's going on. There's no update to it. This is a new one. Thank you. I don't know if you want to add something.
Thank you, Councillor Khan, and thank you, Chair. I would just like to correct a couple of statements made earlier in relation to the uptake of cycling since the implementation of Cycleway 9. Now, Cycleway 9 was implemented in December 2020. For the period for which we have data, starting from February 2021. I will go through these numbers just so that it's clear. In February 2021, there were 1,239 users. This is based on an average weekly flow. So 1,239 in February 2021. In March, that increased to 1,598. In April 2021, that increased to 2,125. In May 2021, that went down slightly to 1,916. And in June 2021, that's 2,316. So from February 2021, we've gone from 1,239 weekly users to 2,316. I would contend by anyone's standard, that's an improvement, a significant improvement. In terms of air quality, whilst it is true that we only have one monitoring station, and it's not possible to have an air quality monitoring station on every road within the borough. That's simply impossible. It's not practical. We have to base what we have based on a sample. And we believe, and air quality teams believe, that the information we have from that air quality monitoring station is sufficiently representative. And that's what it's about. It has to be representative. And all we've seen in the last 1 year is an improvement in air quality. Now, there's a question as to how much of that is attributable to COVID-19 and pandemic, and that's a fair question. But based on data we have, there has been an improvement on air quality. Of course, as we go forward, we will have to monitor that to see if that improvement continues or if there's a downturn. But again, air quality monitoring stations, absolutely we can have more. It's one of those things where you can never have enough. But at the moment, we only have one, and there's a case to say, well, we need to have more. But at the moment, we only have one, and we can only base decisions on results we get from that particular one that's on site.
Thank you, Jefferson. Councillor Tuck? Oh, sorry, Councillor Tuck and then Councillor Hearn.
Thank you, Chair. My next question to Councillor Khan is, does the lead member not agree that the failure to conduct a full public consultation on the proposed new ETO is contrary to the Council's policy framework? Surveys, workshops, and other forms of engagement are not substitutes for a full public consultation. Would the lead member commit himself now to carrying out a full public consultation on all the options before any version of this new ETO is made permanent? And I remember Councillor Khan responding yes to a question I asked in a meeting last year, that will you remove these temporary measures if the consultation says so?
Thank you, Councillor Tuck. Councillor Khan?
Yeah, sure. Also, I'd like to bring in Councillor Dunn at some point when I've answered. So yes, I've been very clear with my decisions that if we're referring to low traffic neighbourhoods schemes, if they were deemed not appropriate or they were not meeting our requirements, then yes, we'll make a decision as to modify them or take them out. So yeah, I stand by that. That I agree with you, and I did answer you with that same question. In terms of the consultation, we do propose that during the experimental traffic order, which potentially could last up to 18 months, is when we will be engaging with the public. We will be engaging with stakeholders. We'll be engaging with the residents and businesses and understanding their requirements. Effectively, that's what an experimental traffic order is. And as Officer Jefferson said earlier, that we're also implementing a 21-day engagement process before this experimental traffic order starts. And that actually in normal times is not the norm. So we're doing an additional, and hence why we really do welcome your input, yourself and your colleagues, and obviously members of the Overview and Scrutiny for this engagement that we're doing today, so that we can be guided, as the chair said before, as a critical friend. So yeah, so one, I would say that yes, we will be doing consultation. Now, when you use the words of failing, I'm not sure what you're referring to when you use the words failing. We've evidently have described how we have built a temporary cycle lane, where the original budget was going to be about £9 million. Actually, we ended up, remind me, Jefferson, how much was it we spent? Was it 300,000? Yeah. So a scheme that would potentially have cost us £9 million. Well, not us, sorry. This money is Transport for London's money. So I apologise if I'm giving the impression to them that it's not our money. This is a Transport for London scheme. And if you imagine it's going 6 kilometres, it's also touching Hammersmith and Fulham as a local authority as well. So I would also like to ask, if I'm allowed to chair, is when Councillor Tuck uses the word failing, I just want to understand what Councillor Tuck actually means specifically in terms of failing. Thank you. That's okay.
Councillor Tuck.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. When I say failing is full public consultation. We have used other forms of engagement, but they cannot substitute full public consultation.
Okay, so Chair, if you allow me, I mean, I rather than me repeat myself, I'll ask Councillor Dunn to answer in terms of full public consultation, and then if Jefferson, you could just talk about the process, because we have to follow, and you will see that me personally, and I've expressed this with all of my team, that the equalities and impact and the stakeholders has to be our number one priority when we start looking at the new experimental traffic order during the first 6 months and the 18 months, because we have to look at that as a priority. Catherine, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Thanks, Chair. Councillor Tack. So it's not clear what you mean by full public consultation. I mean, there's obviously many different types of consultation that can take place. My opinion is that the experimental traffic order represents a particular advantage to consultation, that if you could have it in other areas, it would provide advantages there. It's clearly not always possible, depending on what kind of change you're trying to introduce. But the opportunity to allow people to see what something is like in practice, rather than a theoretical, carrying out consultation on an idea or plans, is a huge advantage. And so I think it's in many ways a superior form of consultation, and there will be wide consultation on the scheme in place so people can see what it is actually like. But consultation is but a small part of engagement, and I'm really pleased that we are doing engagement ahead of putting this in. We know that some of the schemes last year, although there was some engagement, it was somewhat limited, and that led to things being put in with, and we did say we will have more consultation, we'll have more engagement. And so, I'm pleased that this is taking place. But the consultation itself takes place on the scheme, and that's the beauty of a trial. So you can see what it's actually like.
Thank you, Councillor Don. Jefferson.
Thank you, Chair. And as Councillors Khan and Don pointed out, one of the good things about a trial, certainly from an engineering point of view, is that you're not debating about an idea. You're not looking at a drawing and giving your ideas as to what it might look like, how it might work. You're dealing with reality, what is on the ground, what has actually been built, and you can make tweaks to it before it's made permanent or reversed. And those options are always there with a trial. You can always see that if it doesn't work within this 18 months period, you can review it and come to a judgment that actually this is better off removed. But actually, if it's working, if there are tweaks I need to make it work better, you can still do that. So actually, it is one of the best ways to implement a scheme. Hence, those powers are there under the legislation I mentioned previously. Now, if the question is, are we going to consult? Yes, we're going to do 21 days pre-engagement, which is over and beyond that which is required under the law. The law doesn't require us to engage at all before implementing the trial. But we're actually going above that. We're doing 21 days. And beyond that, once the scheme is implemented, there will be a 6-month period of statutory consultation. That's full-scale consultation for 6 months. And again, even when we go beyond that, we're still going to be collecting data, getting feedback throughout the 18-month period of the scheme. So this is consultation plus, if you like.
Thank you, Jefferson. Councillor Tuck, you have some more questions. Would you like to ask them all just at one time and then they can, if that's easier for you?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Well, I had a supplementary on this one. When I said full public consultation, I meant what form of consultation we'll be using. Either is it just cyclists going in, asking them, or is it going to be to every resident in the area? I'll ask all my questions so that Councillor Khan can answer.
I think that may be easier.
Yeah. In a previous presentation, we were given a tagline number that bus journeys are only delayed by 1.3 minutes per kilometer. But at that time, we were not told how this average was calculated. Later on, it was brought to our attention that it is a 24-hour based average. Of course, during the night, there are no traffic, so it will be a lot less delays, or I'll say no delays at all. Do we have the numbers during the peak hours, what the delays were, and not the averaged out numbers, so that we can assess the clear impact on the free-flowing traffic, the bus journeys? That's one question. Another question is, in the absence of any detailed financial information, how can the lead member ask the cabinet to approve the implementation of this new ETO? And the next question is, have we considered the safety of our elderly and most vulnerable people while we are opting for floating bus stops? How these people are going to reach the bus stop without being put at risk of colliding with the speeding cyclist? And we need independently verified data for incidents to support an informed decision, and we would like that data to see before we put in this temporary measure in there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tuck. Who's going to answer that? Is that Jefferson or Councillor Khan or Councillor Dunn?
So what I'll do is I'll farm them out. Probably a bit easier.
Okay. Who's going to go first?
So the different types of consultation, we've all been through already many consultations through engagement. TfL have done engagement through writing letters, having events, met businesses independently. They've met residents and all the different stakeholders as well. But we as a local authority will also, during that process, sorry, are you referring to during the ETO or prior to the ETO? Sorry.
Both.
So prior, I guess you could say, is the 21-day engagement, and we've already started that. We've already had 3 online engagements already. I think there's one also Friday, there's one today, there was one yesterday. So that was online with residents who were able to join in. Yeah, that was for it kind of forms into that process. So I'll let my colleagues add into that. For me personally, with the bus times, if Transport for London gave the statistics that it was 1.3 minute per kilometre and it was based on a 24-hour period. So if you then took away this increase, it's still over a 24-hour period when the buses are travelling during the night time. So when you look at the data specifically and you summarize, it's going to be the 1.3 kilometres. So we can ask Transport for London for that specific data, and I don't know if Jefferson has that contact data which you can answer. And in terms of the costs, are you referring to budgetary cost, the actual amount of money, or because I did say earlier that this is a Transport for London scheme and the cost is bared by them. And lastly, in terms of the consultation, you used the word specifically for the elderly people with the bus gates. Any of my colleagues can take that question, so thank you. So I guess let's start from the beginning then. So types of consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Chair. In terms of consultation, just to reassure you, Councillor Tak, I will just refer you back to the level of consultation that was done previously on the existing trial, the one we're looking to discontinue. So TfL sent letters to 8,000 addresses in Chiswick and stakeholder emails. So there was general update on the scheme. There were invitation for conversations with the community. I think about 655 stakeholders and residents who came to town hall type events. And then there were conversations with around 48 stakeholders. That's what happened. That's part of what happened during the current trial. Now, what we're proposing to do is would obviously engage with as many residents as possible throughout the area in question. We would have online surveys. We'll have engagement with councillors, with ward councillors, similar to the kind of engagement events we have been carrying out throughout this week in relation to street space. So we'll have similar events where both councillors and members of the public will be welcome to ask questions, get updates, and obviously contribute to share their ideas on how they see the scheme working. So that will be an ongoing process. All of those will be penciled in, and there'll be questionnaires, there'll be surveys to addresses as well throughout that period. So there will be plenty of engagement. In terms of equalities, I think that's where we actually need to do a lot more. So it has come to light recently that there's actually a need for autistic children and autistic people generally to be better engaged. Why? Because, and this is something that perhaps engineers do not think enough about. Actually, someone who's autistic, seeing the whole landscape that they're used to, the layout of a road that they're used to changing, means that they need a degree of adaptation. And that's something that we need to work on to make sure that someone who's autistic comes onto the road and gets used to the new layout. So we'll be working with the Autistic Society and local groups as well to improve that. There was some concerns around where you have two-stage zebra crossings and how people would know who has the right of way when they get to a two-stage crossing, where you have to go through a cycleway first, then go through the carriageway. Again, that's something that we need to do better on, and we have plans in place to engage both Age UK and other third sector bodies in that regard. So there's a wide range of consultation that we need to do, both in terms of we'll continue to engage. TfL's designs are compliant with or were developed in conjunction with Royal National Society for the Blind, and we'll continue to engage with them throughout the process through TfL as well. So there will be a lot of engagement, both as part of the 21-day, but also for the 6-month statutory period, in my view, even beyond that, until such time as the scheme is either made permanent or discontinued.
Councillor Tuck, is that all? Thank you. Councillor Hearn, did you have a question? If you'd like to, and then I'll invite Councillor Akanzada.
Right, for Jefferson, just a couple of kind of connected areas. Can we just really confirm that we're not measuring modal shift, and we have no direct evidence of modal shift? That's the first question.
Okay, so
The second one, are you really asking me to compare cycle numbers in February, which, as I seem to recall, that the particular date was both wet and even snowy? Are you really asking me to compare those cycle numbers, even accepting that the numbers themselves are valid, with June? I think we can all recall what it was like in June. I mean, there's seasonality in cycling, and that's part of the problem with this. It just strikes me we're not dealing with, we're being asked to make decisions, or you are being asked to make decisions on information which is seasonal, and I think that needs to be taken into account. It just seems blindingly obvious.
Jefferson.
thank you, Chair. There are, I suppose, the reality is the scheme was only implemented in December. We are now during the first few days of August. We only have data available from February to June. That's data we have. I'm afraid we cannot manufacture any other data. We have to base decisions on data that we have available. And data we have available shows high increase in cycling, quite a significant one, that which you can goes beyond whether it was raining or not. Going from 1,300 to 2,300 is a significant increase. So in terms of the uptake or the success, if that's a success criteria, then I think the scheme has been successful. In relation to, sorry, I've forgotten, Councillor.
We're not measuring modal shift, or are we? There just doesn't seem to be anything in place to demonstrate the modal shift.
The issue with modal shift is that it doesn't happen tomorrow. So if you build a cycleway today, doesn't mean that people would sell their cars the next day and start cycling. It takes time. The infrastructure has to be in place, and people then have to start seeing those who don't normally cycle have to take up cycling for a start. Then you start seeing the modal shift. Modal shift is gradual. It doesn't happen overnight, and no one expects it to happen within 6 months. But we are seeing an increase. We are seeing uptick is increasing. So therefore, there is some evidence of modal shift.
But sorry, if I can continue the dialogue, this is the last thing. Promise, Jefferson. For there to be modal shift, you have to be able to demonstrate there's less traffic. Yes. And that people are shifting from buses and cars onto bikes or walking. And that's not happening. Anyone can see that with their eyes. And that's the reason why we're looking at, I will call it a modified plan. That's why we're looking at a scheme which will allow the traffic to move more quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Hearn. It is true that at the moment we are not necessarily seeing evidence of a reduction in vehicular use, but the scheme has only been in place for 7 months. Nobody seriously expects to see such a significant reduction over this period of time. In fact, the numbers we have for cycling and the increase in cycling is remarkable, given how short lived the scheme has been so far. So I think with time, that change will happen. I think it's probably already happening because we're seeing the uptick. Presumably, people who are now cycling going from 1,300 to 2,300 within 6 months, they were using other modes of travel previously, and obviously have now taken up cycling. What we need to do, I agree with Councillor Hearn, that we need to see over time a reduction in car usage. At the moment, we haven't seen that, or we don't have evidence for it. Doesn't mean evidence doesn't exist. But also we need to allow the scheme some time to bed in. It's only been around for 7 months.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's a convenient argument, isn't it? Oh, we haven't seen any modal shift yet, so let's take it out. I mean, which is what you are arguing for. You're saying the option should be there to remove it, but we haven't had time to see. We're not expecting modal shift in that period, we are starting to see something that may well be modal shift. There are massive increases in the number of people cycling. You pointed out that people are working from home, and that is the case. And that will slowly start to change. So I went into my central London office yesterday for the first time since March last year. And there were 11 desks available in the whole office. That over the next few weeks will change more. There will be more desks available as social distancing is no longer required. More people will be coming into central London from where they live outside of London, some of them from this borough, and hopefully cycling through Chiswick as I did yesterday. And it's not simply about increasing the numbers, it's also about safety for those who do choose to cycle. And C9 is safer than what was there before. And when you hit the border and get to Hammersmith and Fulham, it's pretty sketchy on King Street. And when you get to Kensington and Chelsea, it's downright dangerous. And it used to be dangerous like that in Chiswick. And there are numerous reasons why we need it, but also we haven't had time yet to see the full effect, and I am confident that we will see a greater effect. And the surefire way of not seeing a greater effect is by taking this sort of thing out.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Khan, and then just quickly, please, because then
Okay.
we need to get everybody to ask.
Thank you, Chair. My point is very short, is we've got to look at our future generation. And this is something that we need to really consider, that there is a whole sway of young people and their children will come and they would need alternative modes of transport to feel safe. So that's the other option, which I'll just add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander, then Councillor Foote.
Yeah, can I, just on a point of order, Chair, Councillor Hearn was asking questions and I can't find anywhere in my papers where that was.
You're quite right, Richard. That was very naughty of me. I apologise if that's necessary. I was abusing the freedom.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. I have just one question from Councillor Hearn and then two questions from Councillor Khan. Just like, the first one is that it is referred that this project is in breach of the budget or framework and the council legal policies. You have touched on it, but you didn't explain why is that so? Because it's a very basic question if you are saying that you are going for option 3, pushing for that. So if you can just elaborate that more, why you think that it is in a breach of these two points.
We believe there are budget implications that are not being discussed. The use of staff time, quite a wide range of staff. If that is not true, then it needs to be stated explicitly. The information provided, but basically, as you've heard from Councillor Khan, is all of this is being paid for by TfL. I think that just needs to be more explicit, and that the use of staff time, even the employment of additional traffic officers, consultants. You've seen what's called engagement. Where is the funding for that? And the other item which has come up, of course, is, and of course, the whole emphasis is that this is all a brilliant idea, that we believe if we build it, they will come. We've heard that repeated several times. But we have to have the possibility that these schemes will be taken out or seriously modified, perhaps going to single direction schemes, for example, so that we need to know that the money is there to and this would be a budget implication. The money is held to be able to take the existing schemes out and reconfigure them, equally safe cycleways, but single direction routes. That things which, when they were considered, I remember Hanif Khan told us that if we had a single direction on either side of the road, we'd need 2 meters to do that, and therefore 4 meters in total. It's interesting, the scheme we've got is just 3 meters wide, with ones that no one wants to drive close to. But does that answer your question? But there are financial implications which I don't think are being explored. They've just been brushed to one side. It's essentially what I'm saying.
Thank you. Can I just ask both of my question at once? So, like, you know, in all this discussion, we keep referring to this consultation process and all that stuff. Like, you know, and you have already identified that the process is already started online and all. My question will be like, you know, how you can make this methodology more inclusive to include all stakeholders, businesses, like, you know, passengers, traffic, and all these people who are the stakeholder. And secondly, that what kind of, within that question is that what kind of radius we are looking into, that we are collecting all this feedback from the local. And if we can have also breakdown of these radius that, like, you know, people who are living close to this high street, of course they will be impacted more. So how they are taking it, and how, like, you know, everyone else in the Chiswick area is considering this as a project. And my second question is that in the report we are and it was touched earlier a little bit, but I just need to clarify it more, that we are keep referring to the comparison of these data, and we are saying that we are almost similar now to the pre-pandemic situation or the level regarding pollution, traffic flow, and all that. But in my view, we are still not, like, you know, we are recently out of these restrictions. So how justifiable is that data to use to have that comparison? Because that comparison won't be that accurate as we have recent, or still we are not 100% out of pandemic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Khan is
thanks,
going
Chair.
to answer. Okay.
Thank you. Two really good questions, and I appreciate the question. But what I will do when I finish or before, I will, if you don't mind, Chair, I'll request Jefferson just to give an indication of the budgetary constraints when we look at the C9 and in relation to Transport for London. But in relation to kind of like your first question, it's one of the reasons why we're here with you guys, because you're going to tell us, right? This is why we're sitting with you, where you're advising us. That's what the overview and scrutiny process is to make sure that we've covered everything. And without our working relationship as a technical friend, we may not get it right. So we would obviously be looking for you as well to understand those methodologies as to how we can improve that consultation. So that's my kind of rough answer to your question. But also this idea of, which we know there is a statistic that says about 40% of most journeys that are local can be done within 20 minutes of either walking or cycling. And that is what we need to try and help able-bodied people to not get in their car and do a short journey. And if we can help change that mode shift, that would be more than enough to allow our social workers, our children who need to be driven to school because of SENs, our police force, our delivery drivers, those on e-cargo bikes. So this is what we're looking for, and this radius and this feedback is what this whole process is, and we are seeing some of these changes. But I'll let my colleagues give more detail on that. And your second part, I've scribbled some notes down, and I actually can't read my own writing, but I think it's related to the pollution. Is that correct?
It's regarding the comparison data of
Yeah.
pandemic and
Yeah.
current.
So one of the really important things that we've got to recognize is that when the pandemic kicked in, the first thing that people did is they didn't use public transport. They completely gave up on Transport for London. They gave up on their buses, and they were told to work at home. So what did everybody do at that time? They did two things. They got in their cars and they did every short journey, every long journey, and everything they could imagine because they felt safe in their cars. The other thing they did mostly that we saw is they got on their bikes. And this realization is where our Transport Minister, Grant Shapps, mentioned that we have the opportunity of a once-in-a-lifetime generation opportunity to capitalize on people who have decided to use either walk or cycle. And all of this is what has led to us as a council for, as we come out of lockdown, is to not have a car-borne recovery. We can't have that. We can't. When you said already you've had statistics now that people have, there are statistics saying that we haven't even come out of officially properly lockdown. People have still been advised to work home, and we've got the same number of cars on the road. So the situation is only going to get worse. So how can we curtail this? What are we going to do as a borough, as a London authority, GLA, as a country, England or the United Kingdom? And this is why you have people like the leader of our country, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, and Grant Shapps, who are actively encouraging all local authorities to continue working with these low traffic neighborhoods, continue with these cycle lanes, continue with the implementation of these experimental traffic orders, because they see the writing on the wall. It's obvious. And the second thing is the generation, that what are we going to do for our children, our children's children? Now, if you look back, would you build these super 5-line highways for cars on the road to get into a city? You probably think, no, we should be looking at our future generation, the health aspect. We should be looking at pollution. We should be looking at how we can curtail obesity. So this is the massive question you've asked. And this is why having your feedback and engagement really helps us focus what we as officers and colleagues do. So I hope I've gone to some way to answer your two questions. And I don't know if my colleagues want to add something, but I'm sure Jefferson would want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly, I think Councillor Khan has covered the data elements. I think at the moment we are very close to pre-pandemic levels. And based on data we have, I still think there's still, I think you are completely right. We need to monitor a little bit more. But data we have at the moment is very encouraging, but in terms of air quality improvements, but I think that needs to be monitored over. Hence, we're proposing this trial so we can continue to monitor improvements or see if there's a drop. It's entirely possible that improvements will continue, but we can only assess that as part of the trial. So that's to address that point. In terms of Councillor Chair, if I may, Councillor Hearn's question around staff time and budgetary implications. This is a TfL scheme. It's entirely funded by TfL. Staff time is reimbursed, so we receive payment from TfL to reimburse us for staff time. So there is no budgetary burden at all. There's no cost burden on the number of hands there at all. In terms of legal element of the question, if I may as well, of course, the report that was proposed to the Cabinet approved on 20th of July was subject to legal oversight by our legal teams, as well as our governance protocols.
Good. Thank you, Jefferson. Councillor Dunn and then Councillor Lal, please.
I think the point's been covered. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Lal, do you have a question?
Chair, thank you very much. I think Councillor Dunn made reference to cyclist safety, and one of the call-in issues that was highlighted here was about cycling incidents, etc. So we're all mindful of the fact that the whole scheme is designed to also have safety in mind, and I'd like clarification that lessons have been learned from the previous ETO, and what measures, if anything, are going to be included in the new ETO. I know there was reference to it in the report. And I also want confirmation that the data which is submitted to the Cabinet, that the Cabinet was happy with the data that was submitted and was comfortable with it, so that allaying any concerns about cycling safety.
Thank you, Councillor Lau. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the data provided to Cabinet, yes, we are very comfortable with that. I mean, the question was raised during the previous scrutiny committee pre-Cabinet approval, and that was, we provide clarification on that. The data is absolutely clear in terms of improvements and reduction in accidents on Cycleway, certainly within the extent of the Cycleway. The issue with the data, or the challenge around the data, came from people looking at the entirety of Chiswick High Road, which frankly is not really relevant. We are looking at accidents that relate to the extent of the Cycleway. So that clarification was provided previously. And in terms of lessons learned, absolutely, that's hence we are proposing some of these measures. So I think I touched on one earlier, which is around two-stage crossing points, and how do you ensure how do you provide clarity of the right of way when someone is having to go through a two-stage crossing point, going through a cycle lane, then having to go through the carriageway. So that's one of the lessons that we have learned that we need to improve upon. But also, I think there's also a piece around engagement, particularly with older groups, with visually impaired groups, and we're looking at what we're planning to do as part of both the 21-day engagement, probably more around the 6-month statutory consultation period, is to introduce walks. So we have walked through the sites with some of these groups as much as possible, just to make sure people are familiar, understand the routes. And also there'll be a degree of cyclers, cycle lane training for cyclists as well, to ensure that they understand, they're familiar with the new layouts, and they understand where they have to give way to pedestrians. So there is a lot of work to be done, and we are more than ready for that. That's part of the whole 6 months statutory consultation, and some of it will be done within the first the pre-engagement for 21 days. Obviously, due to time constraints, there's only so much we can do within 21 days. So a lot of it will be during the 6-month period.
Thank you, Jefferson. Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, if I can comment. So, I mean, Jefferson's kind of covered the safety aspect there and explained about the data. So, yes, as Cabinet, we were comfortable with that data. There was obviously a challenge that came from One Chiswick that was repeated in this room when at the overview and scrutiny meeting. But as Jefferson has explained, they were looking at the whole of the Chiswick High Road. And I will just add that when they posted that data originally on the Chiswick W4 forum, or they not only did they put data there from the whole of Chiswick High Road, which could be, a reasonable mistake, but they actually obscured the exact locations deliberately. So I do think the intention there was to mislead. Yeah, that I wasn't particularly. They didn't inspire me with their own data that they put forward, I shall just say. But I think, it's not just about cycle safety, it has to be about safety for all road users. And I think we have, learnt lessons, and we are looking at ways to improve that with this new experimental traffic order. And one of the things I'll point to is that we will be putting bus shelters on the islands, on the bus stop bypasses. Previously, they did not have that. That people were if they wanted to use a shelter, had to use the existing shelters, and then obviously cross over to the island when the bus came. And I think it will be a safety improvement to actually have the shelters and the seating on, at the point where they are actually going to be alighting and getting on the bus, so that that it takes away that extra source of anxiety, that extra source of potential danger about, running across at the last minute to get the bus. That shouldn't have to happen. So I think that's a clear example of where we are looking at safety for everyone.
Councillor Dunn. Sorry, Jefferson, just a very quick question. It's just about the bus timings. Well, can you just elaborate a little on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. From data we have, and I think there was a question raised by Councillor Tark earlier, since the return of traffic levels to almost pre-pandemic levels or thereabouts, in May 2021, eastbound was somewhere around 1.3 minutes per kilometer above baseline. That increased slightly in June to 1.4 minutes, and in July it's come down to 1 minute. And I think to be able to properly assess improvements in bus journeys, TfL have introduced a Scoot system just around the bus gate. Scoot needs time to work, and unfortunately, they've only introduced certain parts of Scoot. The whole scheme is not yet complete. Now, for those who are not aware, sorry, Scoot is a traffic optimization software. So its job is to optimize traffic, and obviously that means that traffic signals work in an optimal fashion, to put it simply. That needs to be in place fully. We hope to have that in place fully as part of these new trials, and obviously that we'll monitor that over a period of time. We expect that to improve journey times, but I think what we've seen in the last 3 months is a slight increase above baseline.
Thank you. Actually, I was just about to ask you what you meant by Scoot, but you preempted me there. Thank you. Right. Sorry, I'm muttering away here to myself. Okay, we're now going to move on finally to the main part of our responsibility, which is to see how much we agree with the call-in request. Well, actually, do we agree with all of it, some of it, or not at all? I will ask members if they would like to express their opinions on that, and if they wish to explain why they think that way. Councillor Tark, I'll also be asking you, as part of this process, to express your views. I would like to ask everybody to bear in mind the reasons in the Constitution that I'd listed earlier, and which are included in the procedure note which has been provided to you. Each member can have up to 5 minutes. Thank you. Councillor Foote, do you wish to go first?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to comment. I think that looking at the 6 points, item 1, which was inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to the decision, in view of the volume of emails I've received and the large amount of detail that the writers of those emails go into, it would seem to me that there was plenty of data out there for stakeholders prior to the decision coming through. So, I can't say that I agree with that. And again, on the same lines, the absence of adequate evidence on which to base a decision. I can't comment on how people interpret the data that's there, but I can say that I have to say that there is every evidence that the data was there. The decision is contrary to the policy framework, or contrary to, or not wholly in accordance with budget framework. Well, we know that the budget itself is TfL's. I'm not really quite sure how we can answer that question in those circumstances. Again, with item 4, the action is not proportionate to the desired outcome. I can't agree with that. I think it is proportionate, and therefore I can't agree with that either. To be honest, item 5, a potential human rights challenge, I really don't understand that one at all. I have no idea what that's about. And finally, 6, insufficient consideration of legal and financial advice. Again, I see no evidence of that. And so therefore, Chair, my view would be that we reject all 6.
Thank you. Councillor Tuck?
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I asked in my questions as well, and I can see here, it's been mentioned proper consultation, but I don't see it meeting the standards. It's been substitutes to the full public consultation in the previous scheme as well, and I fear that this is exactly what's going to happen in this new ETO as well. So that's my view on consultation. And I see one point at the human rights as well, that we are making constant changes to the traffic orders and ETOs. It is not helpful for the vulnerables to keep learning these new changes in very short span of time. So we cannot keep experimenting on these. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tuck. Councillor Akinzada?
Thank you, Chair. I won't go to discuss all 6 of that. But the most important thing, which is potential insufficient consideration of legal and financial advice, which is the most important for this call-in, I am not agreeing with that, because as it's explained that there is no budgetary consideration for us. And as the officer have already explained, that all the legal advice were considered. So for me, that is out of question. The only 2 things that I can kind of partly agree is the I won't use the same that inadequate consultation, but I would say that more consultation should take place, and then the human right thing, again, I don't agree with that. Then the second one, the absence of evidence on which these decisions are based, again, I don't agree with all of the element mentioned in the call-in. But yes, there are a few things that, as I've questioned, that the data which keep referring to pre-pandemic level, there is no pre-pandemic level which we are comparing it with. So these 2, I partially agreed. The rest, I don't agree with all the other points of the call-in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lal?
Chair, I probably echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues as well. During this session, we've heard some very, very valid questions being asked to Councillors Khan and Dunn and Officer Jefferson. And having heard the deliberations and the answers that were given, I'm come to the conclusion that the responses were adequate and quite robust to the questions asked. And therefore, in terms of this call-in, I don't see any reason why it needs to proceed any further. So I come to the conclusion that the challenge to this decision should not be taken any further, meaning that the decision it's first bullet point. I'm put my hand on. I thought it's yeah. So the first bullet point in the decision-making chart, that the challenge to the decision should be taken no further.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, in regards to the human rights, I totally disagree with that. I think Jefferson has explained that they are looking at new things. There is a need for people with autism. you know, to have things a certain way. And, you know, they are taking all things into consideration. The other points as well, I really don't agree with your report. So I will be disagreeing with it. Thank you. Actually, Councillor Foot, if you would like to sum up and see if we have any partial or whole consensus today. And if you'd like to then propose a motion.
Sorry, Chair. I think it's all been summed up, really. There's very little for me to add to that. I think that the points that have been made by myself and my colleagues say all of that. And I'd therefore like to propose the motion that we formally do not proceed with this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foot. Would anybody like to second that? Okay, seconded by Councillor Lal. Right, we will now go to a vote. So those who wish to accept what Councillor Foot has proposed, please raise your hands. Okay, so it looks like that has been accepted. So thank you. This evening, as I say, we have all accepted that we do not accept the minority report, and there will be no follow-up. Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, you can just clarify that the challenge should not be taken any further, meaning that the decision may now be implemented.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't clear, but thank you. Yes. Oh, sorry, I'm not pressing the button correctly. I'd like to thank everybody tonight. And I guess that's it. Is there any other urgent business? No? Okay. Once again, thank you all very much for being present here today at the first meeting of the new committee. Thank you and good evening.